Steve, thanks for being with us today.
It's good to be here.
Looking forward to this conversation with you about a very difficult topic, but one that we must have when we work with the vulnerable in our churches, registered sex offenders. That is a big issue in our culture, and we can't turn a blind eye to it. So I have some questions for you that I want us to share with the larger church. The first question is, why should churches take the time to discuss if a registered sex offender would like to be a part of the church?
I think there's a practical answer and a theological one. Let's take the more important theological one first. We're called to be a missional church. We're called to be a place that all, sinners or not, come to understand the grace of God. And yet we're also called to have safe spaces for those who are worshiping. And how do we tackle both of those at the same time? The practical answer is there's nearly 850,000 registered sex offenders in the United States. It's growing by double-digit % every year, and in my view will continue to grow. And therefore, churches at some point will be faced with the issue of how do we integrate or not registered sex offenders in our congregation. So it's better, in my view, to deal with this when there's not a situation in front of one. In part to learn the breadth of this issue, because not every registered sex offender is on the registry for the same reason. Not every registered sex offender was registered yesterday. And you have to understand and try to learn how, as a congregation, you're going to treat those differences when they arise.
Absolutely. Great advice. Wonderful. What are some of the best practices when a registered sex offender wants to be a part of the church community?
I always tell folks that the very first thing one should do is, if it's possible, to talk to the parole officer. Interview the parole officer at length to understand better the context in which this request is being made. Second, I would have a very candid discussion with the offender to determine what happened and the offender's view of what happened. Create a covenant agreement, of course, the creation of a covenant agreement is important. It's important so that everybody understands the lay of the land and the path forward. It has to be specific. It has to be implemented. And it has to have consequences if the offender strays from the path. And finally, one of the most important things is to establish a review period. I always say it should be no less often than annually, and it should occur at every stage when there's a change in the church leadership. If we change partners with the offender in the agreement, then it needs to have a full review. If we change the chair of staff parish committee or another committee that's reviewing this document, it needs to have a full review. Over review is okay.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Steve. And we are a people of the covenant. So what should a covenant include when we're thinking about including a registered sex offender in our worshiping community?
It needs to have a specific statement of accountability. If the individual is not willing to accept the responsibility for that act or those acts that put that person on the registry, then it's probably better not to have the covenant and to let the person go elsewhere. That sounds harsh, but it's true. Second is determine covenant partners and make them very specific. I've seen covenant relationships in churches which say you may come to the 8:30 service, but not the 11, for different reasons. If the covenant partners can't be there, then they can't attend. It needs to be very regimented and very understandable. It should be clear that the offender cannot be on any church property without the partner or partners there. Again, I said it before, I'll say it again, these covenant agreements must be reviewed periodically and often.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate the information that you provided today.
Well, this is an interesting topic. It's becoming more and more important, and I think everyone in every congregation needs to be aware of it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. You're a blessing to the church.
Thanks a lot.